Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Mauricio Perea is an educator, community leader, and autism advocate with over 25 years of experience working with autistic children, youth, and families. Born in Mexico City, he immigrated to the United States in 1988 and has dedicated his professional life to education, inclusion, and community empowerment. Mauricio worked for nearly two decades at Boston Market, advancing from kitchen aide to regional training manager before focusing fully on education and advocacy. He is serving as a special education teacher's assistant with Framingham Public Schools at Blocks from 1998 to the present. Mauricio is a member of the Autism Alliance Program of Advocates Advisory Board, the vice chair of the Framingham Cultural Council, and a member of the Framingham History Center Board of Directors. In recognition of his leadership, he was honored at the Massachusetts Latino Excellence Awards at the State House. His work centers on autism, neurodiversity, and culturally responsive community engagement. The title of his talk today is Neurodiversity and Autism, a Social Understanding. Please give a warm brotherly welcome to Mauricio Perea.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity for present this. If you see the date on that presentation, it has the 4, because this is a series of presentations where we are doing in Framingham, and we're going to continue to do it because the importance of the topic. So please, let me introduce myself. I've been working on the spectrum for over 27 years, and with different ages, from the students that are being diagnosed at 3 years old, all the way to high school, and also with adults and families on the spectrum. And then we create this organization, Boston Coalition for Autism, to cover the need that is really, let's say, needed, because there's a lack of information on what autism is really at this moment, and the importance of to have the knowledge of the new perspective of autism. The paradigm has changed. We have a new vision on autism, and then just a few people are aware, and that's our goal of the organization, to promote that message. So hopefully you can continue spreading this message, because it's for the benefit of us. The importance of understanding neurodiversity is how we can approach the different types of neurodiversity. So, and then the neurodiversity has a lot of strengths. Most of the people, they look at the weakness, but we focus on the positive side. Let's recognize the strengths, but we have to acknowledge the challenges. Don't forget all the challenges that come with a neurodiversity. So, and the way we articulate this sequence, then we can create a better future for people, neurodiverse people. So the way that what is neurodiversity is a variation of the human brain. And we can see biodiversity, and the very simple example is we have tulips, we have roses, and we have daisies. So that's a biodiversity. The same way there's neurodiversity and different type of brains that we have. We all have a typical brain, but then we start to subdivide it in neurodiversity, different types of brain. So some of these neurodiversities, as the topic of today, autism, but also dyslexia, dyscalculia, OCD, ADHD, dyspraxia, Tourette syndrome, and sensory processing are the most common neurodiversity. There's more than that. Also, schizophrenia is a neurodiversity, and some others like that that are not commonly noticed. But some people doesn't. Schizophrenia, for some reason, people is afraid of it. There's different levels of the schizophrenia that what you see in the news is the highest level of schizophrenia. But some people have the mild type, and we don't see that. It's not noticeable. But right now we're talking a cultural point of view. That's what I ask you to see it in the new paradigm. Because we are, in the past, we used to have a correction to fix something from the individual. Then we move to understanding and listen and learn. Now, the new paradigm is the coexistence. We need to be aware of our surroundings and who the people is in the spectrum. That's the main message today. To understand what is a neurodiversity, what is the types of neurodiversity, and most of us, at least we have a member of the family or the workplace or school system, there is a neurodiversity. It's so common that we need to understand it, and that's how we progress on this. The progress is going to benefit not only the organization, but everybody. So it's like, I don't know how to cross this analogy, but the more that we can understand it, the more that we can enrich ourselves with the opportunity of the diversity. So most of this is not happening in textbooks. It's happening right now. It's happening in Framingham today, thanks to you, in classrooms, workplaces, which is a very, or age level, is where we need to also can focus on that part, and everyday decisions. Even the supermarket, we can see the person who is putting the bag in the grocery or the person who is in the aisle as a customer too. So we understand neurodiversity, we understand what happens with people. And the other day we saw a kid in the Stop and Shop, and the person who walked by said, "Oh, it's throwing a tantrum. It's bad parenting." That's not. A tantrum for us is called sensory discharge. So sometimes the supermarket is too much for that kid and reach to a point, accumulated, but they want everything. You see the variety of colors on a shelf. That's too much information for a typical kid, and a neurotypical kid. And then multiply that 10 times to a person in the spectrum, and then say, no, I want this, no, and then the accumulation goes, so it comes into a tantrum, a bad called tantrum, which is the sensory discharge. So that's why we try to educate people and to see this. Something very simple as that. So, but in the spectrum, not everything is a gift. A lot of people misunderstand that all the autistic people are very intelligent, or the division on the IQ, the average IQ is 100 to 110. So only 20% of the people on the spectrum has a higher IQ than 110. 20 people on the spectrum is under 70, which is low IQ. The rest of that is in the middle. So not every person that is here, as in Hollywood, is a high intelligence. So the average people is in the middle. And that's why it's not a superpower. And that's when we start with the word support. So the DSM, which is the manual or the medical manual, says 3 levels of support. But a person on the level 1 doesn't need support all the time. Also, the person on level 3 doesn't need support all the time, but that's when it's most needed. So I hope that a DSM change soon, the neuroclassification of the spectrum, because we are so behind on that. The last manual was created in 2013, so we need it's time to renew it. So, and then if we don't see it like the levels of need, it's going to be hard for us to justify services. Services are needed on all the levels, on all the ages also. People, my brother-in-law just died recently. He was misunderstood as an autistic. He never received the attention that he deserved, and the people around him treat him as like, oh, he has some other brain disability, Alzheimer's, a combination of cirrhosis. When he never drinks, he has cirrhosis, and the liver pollutes the brain. So at his last days, he was incoherent and all that. Just because the misunderstanding of the spectrum. And then, if we understand these, we're also most of you can be involved in the protection of the rights of these people. They have the same rights as everybody else. And that's what part of the organization is working on that. So one of the pillars of the organization, if you are interested, is also we work on migration and autism. So some parents that I work with, they say, "Oh, I'm undocumented. I cannot have services for my kid." And I said, "Your kid was born in the United States and has all the rights of the American citizen. So the kid has the rights for services, for the school, and for the laws, the federal laws can protect people in the spectrum." So, and that's what also this conversation hopefully stands to that part. So these rights are real, the needs are real. So we have to solve for the balance because we are not fighting. There's no side of the spectrum and then the neurotypical. No, we are all together. We live all together. We come every day to work. We come every day to school. So please don't put yourself on the side. The best way to not participate in the war is not to pick a side. So this is not a side situation. It's about identity and support. So we have to understand the strength, the strong part of the people, and also what the challenges come with that. So what the communities do, this is what we do. This is what you participated. This is your active participation in the spectrum. Because when you leave this room, you're going to have an information that you can spread. So secure that all this information that we present is based on science. We use three filters to do this: the biological part, the neuro spectrum, and also everything is filtered by one of the members. Is a doctor in psychology, Dr. Michael Fiondo, probably know him. And then he reviews all the information that we present for you in all these conferences. So the answer that you are responding today to this need, and thank you for that. So autism is one of the most recognized. Right now, the prevalence is 1 out of 31. So a very simple analogy is bring 31 people here, 1 is autistic. That's the common on the country. But Framingham has a higher 1 out of 21 because the services that Framingham provides makes people migrate to this city for those services. Starting in public schools, and if the needs are not met by the public schools, the system pays for a private school, like a NEC, like a Crossroads, and some other schools that are surrounded. And Massachusetts has always been in a higher level of education. We are pioneers in many things, sports and education. So Framingham also has a very decent level nationwide. That's why we have the school, one of the most important schools next to us, which is NEC, New England Center for Children. And then I did a comparison of the system to support system for autistic people in Massachusetts compared to the Silicon Valley area. And we are at a higher level. So we can feel proud of that part of the services provided in Framingham. So we talking about the experience of the inside because most of an autistic person manifests himself in behaviors, but the behaviors are part of the sensory part. We have 8 senses that we are not aware of. Most of us, we are aware of the 5 senses. So the other 3, the 5 senses are external senses. Vision, hearing, all that. Everything comes from the outside. But the other 3 senses, the interoception, the vestibular, and neuroception, are internal senses. Those senses talk to the people in the spectrum, and those are dysregulated in the brain. And that's what we see, like people need to do this. One of these is providing a message, a sensory message to my brain, and then helps me to regulate. This is called mannerism, but the organization tries to change it to that self choice of regulation. Because some other people, they can balance, and that's also a choice of regulation. But the purpose is the same, regulations. So, and you can see people with headphones or noise reduction devices, is because these could be a torment for them. So that's another thing. Beneath the lights and some other things, like also looking in the eyes of people is a very still common thing that we request for people to look in the eye. And I'm working really hard with my coworkers, because when a person in the spectrum is looking through your face, they don't just look at what you see in their eyes. We have at least 40 micro gestures when we are talking. They can see that part. And that information is too much for their brain. And that's why they avoid that touch. And you ask people on the street why they don't look at me. That's one of the reasons. So you can tell them why not to force that, and not to. It's cruelty, I say. So most of the environments are overwhelming. I'm talking about the supermarket. That's too much information for somebody. For us, it's too much. Picture that in a person in the spectrum. So what you can see an adult walking in a supermarket is because they learn to filter that information. But a kid is learning how to do that. So don't expect us, young students, to behave in the way that we do, because there's a neurodiversity. So for us, some can be distractors, but for a student or a person is sensory overload. And then, I don't know if you have seen the movie The Accountant. And this is an autistic person who, when something goes wrong, the dysregulation is there. So the director handled very well how to do it, because when the person is regulated, he uses a piece of wood to put it on the thing, and then when he's dysregulated, he eats himself, because they need a sensory response, a stronger sensory response, because of the dysregulation. So if you haven't seen it, it's very violent, obviously, because it's an action movie, but it talks about this, an adult in the spectrum. So I strongly recommend you to see it, the content. So what we see when we identify an adult on the spectrum is because the processing difference. So we now identify adults who have misdiagnosis by the way of their think. Sometimes they think like very pragmatic. Did you say, don't move from this seat in the next few minutes? They don't really move. They are like the statues, because they are literal. So sometimes they say they don't understand the ironies, they don't understand some jokes, because it makes no sense. It has no logic on what we say. So sometimes, like you have ants in your pants, they really are looking for the ants. So try not to the straight that you can talk to a person in the spectrum, the better for them, because when a person in a group doesn't understand the joke, they start to mask. And we're going to talk about a lot of masking. So they mask and they laugh. They don't even understand what the joke is about. So we will see about masking, especially in females. So some other people have patterns. Like I see the tables. They have, this pattern is irregular. For me, it's nothing. No, because at the end we have an extra table. For other people on the spectrum, that extra table is like, oh, this should be fixed. They should move it to make it equal. Something like that, very simple, bothers people. And that's not what we shouldn't criticize or penalize that kind of thinking, because that's a way of thinking. So, and also when you given a command and say, get up and put your plate away, they stay. And that is because the longer they need to process the information in a longer way than an average people does. And that's what sometimes they say, oh, this person is not compliant, is lazy, and start to negative labels. We need to stop that. We need to give them the time to process the information that they receive. If I give a sentence to a student and say, you need to get up and put your stuff away, for them, it comes like just a chunk of words. But if you give a simple command, get up, put your stuff away, and that's it. So for other people, when you have a conversation, an adult in the spectrum, you have a conversation, and then they just say yes. Sometimes they are not processing what you really say. So that's another part that we understand neurodiversity. Then we can have, especially at the workplace, we can have a different way to give orders or expect information or exchange information with them. So the need for the processing time is one of the main things that people on the spectrum is asking. So, but it's not in an ability, it's different in processing. So the social rules are one of the main things of the people because we have neurotransmitters in the brain. There feed directly some areas of the social concepts are rewarded. The lack of those neurotransmitters are there, and that's why the social is no motivation for them. Especially because it's overcharged too, oversensory, and the social is not a motivator. And then there comes another topic that we're going to talk about is the double empathy. The empathy for this an autistic or an autistic person. But let's finish with this part of the communication. I said sometimes if they say giving a command to a person is not just a simple command. It's more than a command. It's a bunch of words. So we have to understand how to people, not everybody in the spectrum process the information at the same level. We need to understand the individualized way of processing information. Sometimes we say things, we're comment about all the things. It's not a lack of interest. It's like they don't are communicated or they don't have the system to match what we say. So probably that's another thing that you're going to see when after you understand all these new perspectives on the spectrum. So sometimes the emotions are more intense. Again, we're going to neurotransmitters. One thing that our neurotransmitters are created not only on the brain. Some of those start in the microbiota. The microbiota is our digestive system, and then a lot of neurotransmitters go to the brain. That's one of the new discoveries. Well, new is talking about 6 to 7 years ago when they discovered the axis brain microbiota. The other axis is brain heart. For those who don't know, we have neurons in the heart too. We have neurons in the microbiota. We had about 32,000 neurons in the heart and probably about 65,000 neurons in the microbiota. Our brain counts with 86,000 millions of neurons when we are after 3 months after we are born. We are born with a million thousand neurons. And after that, that's called something called pruning, brain pruning, and we eliminate some of those. And then we grew up with 86,000 millions of neurons. And that's what people in the spectrum, they don't have that prune. They continue with all those sensors. The axons are long. The axons are over-connected, and that's why we see this over-sensory. So that's another way to understand the sensory part. And the emotions, they are double. And the way to express too is obviously because they have the regular pattern of expression. The expression you can see, and somebody in the spectrum who makes no sense on the way to communicate is another topic that neurodiverse people has. So meltdowns. So it's a nervous system response. It's like we were talking about in the table. People on the spectrum respond first with the polyvagal system of nerve, which is a primitive system. Some people call it the reptile system, which is the first to respond. And then all the information comes to the frontal cortex. But most of us, we receive the information to the amygdala, the amygdala to the hypothalamus, goes to the amygdala. The amygdala determines if it's safe or not, and then goes to the frontal cortex, and then we start communication or processing the situation. For people on the spectrum, first, the nervous system is the first responder, and they have no control over it. So we as an educators and adults and people who are neurotypical, we have to give a chance for that system. Remember, it's natural system of response. It's a process around system. So when somebody has a shutdown, the difference between meltdown, the shutdown is when people just don't respond, close their eyes, goes to a corner. So that's avoided because they overcharge on the stimulation. That's one of the situations. So when we see somebody in the corner, yes, we have to give him time because that's not fair for us to force a situation when the sensory system is overcharged. So people on the spectrum, when they are aware of the situation, they have to constantly adapt from one situation to another. We do that all the time. We coming from home to this location. After that, we're going to a place with the family. It's a constant adaptation. For them, the sensory charge is extra and then turns into exhaustion. When they come home, it's time for them to rest or to discharge or to be just a moment to relax, close their eyes, and even get into their main interested activities, some video games or some books or some assemble a train or some special interest. You know, special interest in the spectrum is a high thing, one of the characteristics of the spectrum. Now, sometimes when they don't have that opportunity, that turns into an anxiety. Right now, one of the most common situations of the young people is anxiety and depression. So, and anxiety is the incapacity to predict what is going to come. So they don't have that capacity because all the systems are irregular. And then when we have a system that can help the person in the spectrum, so the anxiety reduces. The response, all the responses come to an order. So all these elements make them to lose identity because they try to mask, they try to be who they are not. So when the people is all tired of being another person, copying, masking, and all that stuff, there's a moment that the body has not enough energy. So, and then that's why we see people doing nothing, and then we misjudge them. Okay, they have no interest, they are lazy, they are this, and all those negative levels. If we understand this part, we can have a different view of what we see in a person's spectrum. So, the people who call function, the community hates the word function. A lot of people say, oh, this is a person that's autistic, but it's very functional. Function is a machine. The human doesn't function. Human needs, acts. But the community, when they say, oh, I'm not a functional person because I'm not a machine. So please avoid that word for the wealth of the community. So autism is not like I have autism because I have a car, but I don't have autism. I am autistic. So that's another differentiation that we need to label in the people. Because if you have something, you can get away with that. But when you are something, you cannot get away with that. So that's another thing that terminology on the spectrum is very important for them. And people can be less autistic or not on their view, but they still going to be autistic. That's why we call it a spectrum. The spectrum is like a pie. Some pieces are larger, some pieces are on, some pieces are off, and that's what we cannot. In the past, they used to label linear spectrum. It starts from here and ends here. Now it's a pie. So that's how we can, the pie has a different sizes because different comorbidities, different ADHD. 40 to 70% of the spectrum, and autistic spectrum, has ADHD. So, and the ADHD has also subdivisions. According to the manual, we have only 3 divisions of ADHD. But a lot of outdoors people in the science world, they want to push for 7 levels. Hopefully the new DSM comes with those 7 levels. So the more supported, the more authentic. People is who it is, and no matter what, autistic or not, we have a personality. But we need to support who they are. So sometimes we overlook the profiles because the gender, the visible behaviors. So many people who are not boys, people who don't present the typical behaviors are missing. So that's when the late diagnosis comes. The late diagnosis in females, which is a very important thing in society right now, comes in that we oversee it. So we're going to talk about all that because when we have not been diagnosed, we have people that we label as too sensitive or lazy person or some difficult person. So because let's say that coworker, we tell them you need to do this and do that and blah blah blah. And there's if they don't have these very specific words of the task, they don't do it. And then we start to say, oh, this person is lazy and difficult to work with because they don't understand the processing time for them to take. Or there's a straight direction that we have to provide. But after the diagnosis, the clarity and identity comes. That's intrinsic level. So that's the importance of that. Now, autism in females. That neurotypical female brain is smaller than the male brain, and that's why they have more connections or faster connections because the information in the brain doesn't have to travel as much in a male brain. So the male brain has its advantage because we are microviewers, and then the female brain in a neurotypical person has all these response. Like if somebody gets hurt, the female responds faster than the male. The male has to process all that. One of the very typical persons that you can see about in the spectrum with the macro view is Leo Messi, the football player. What makes him different when he's in the field, he's running to the goal. With or without the ball, you can see the patterns of the other players, where they're going to be at a certain time. So they can pass the ball without the player being there or without looking at the player. That's the microvision of the person in autism because they learn the patterns. So Leo Messi has a very good knowledge of the patterns of football. That's why he's so there at the moment. And that's the difference between Ronaldo and Messi. Because Ronaldo is the person who has to be there to do that. But Messi can create the pattern or be part of that pattern and be on time because of the readiness of that pattern. So the females have more capacity to hide in the struggles because we always push, oh no, it's a female, and they know how to handle, especially mothers and sons and on all those directions that are very common that we assume the female has to do. So, and when we see a female in the spectrum, we see a big mass. So we need to understand sometimes they have to discharge. When people say, in the past they used to work, the word hysteria was very common. That's very obsolete. And then we blame females to, oh no, having a female moment. That's a very bad judgment. We don't know that the female is in the spectrum or what's its accumulation of sensory discharge and all that stuff. So we have to respect that. So for females, masking is a higher cost than the males. And most of the females are not allowed to manifest what they feel because they have to be mothers first, they have to be teachers, so they have another priority. So the patriarchy is still managing autism, believe it or not. So sometimes after the masking, exhaustion comes with it. It's obviously, what we said before, that the enormous charge of sensory charge in the brains that leads to exhaustion or fear of having, I don't want to go to an event because I know what's going to happen to me. So that person becomes a social, they don't want to socialize, also the lack of motivation and the brain for the social parts. So, and then we start with that disconnections on different levels, and all of these connections create we can call it weird people or something that normally we don't accept. Then from the behavior to the experience, if we see behaviors, we can accumulate experience, which is when we start to see the behaviors in autistic people, we start to develop a different kind of thinking. And then it's very rich. To me, I started like 27 years ago. And when I saw people with Down syndrome or development delayed and all these things, I like that to learn more about it. But when I saw autism, it's so intriguing. It's so different that I was fascinated by the spectrum. And that's why I'm dedicated all my life to this spectrum. And I'm more than happy to continue with that. The visibility of the internal reality. With these elements that I try to put in your brains today, hopefully we can have a different lenses and how to see people in the spectrum. To see that, we need to rethink our systems. The systems that we are functioning right now, again, functioning, are neurotypical. So I determined by neurotypical. When we understand the system that is not adapted for people in the spectrum, we try to in order for us to get the advantage of being with people on the spectrum, is we need to change the system. That's a key word. But we have to be responsible on that shift. We just don't change it like that. Some employers, they said, oh, we are a neuroaffirmative company. We accept people on the spectrum, but they don't do accommodations for them. They just put them in the same seat as any other. And they say, oh, we understand it's autistic, but they don't give the deadlines or the places like they need a special place in their office where there's less noise or less sound and there's less light or some other distractors. But when the person has all this environment to work on, the productivity increases. That's one of the goals of bringing autism to the labor places. And the organization has different programs to talk to employers to how to hire and maintain work with autistic people or any kind of people, neurodiverse people, also including ADHD. So we don't have to fix the individual, but we have to adapt the environment. Adapt the environments, changing the system. And it's fair for all of us. Like I said, productivity is the first result of when we change the environment. Also, when a student has to learn, the learning goes faster. And then as for us as teachers, as educators, it's another system where we have to change. Unfortunately, in my workplace, I have to fight a lot for the change of system, but it's a change. At least if somebody tries to produce a change, at the end, we're going to all be changing. But we need to educate. So we have to interpret the needs. Sometimes people say, oh, I give them what they want. That's a difference. You don't need to give them what they want. You need to give them what they need. And sometimes we have to be very strict on that because a person who is having a tantrum in the middle of the hall, if we remove it to a calm area, the sensory discharge is going to reduce. So that's an example of I'm giving what they need, not what they want. The person wants a toy. The toy is not a solution. That we are just buying time, but that's not a solution. Solution is to understand the needs, change the system, and to take it from there. Now, that's my biggest fight, to adapt the system to the student. And I guess, a teacher who's been doing the same for the last 20 years, and they say, oh, I've been successful with the autistic students for the last 20 years. Sometimes that means that you are coming and do the same mistake for the last 20 years. And then you educate as a person who is going to come and as an adult with all the trauma. The trauma and the spectrum is really one of the everyday for psychologists, psychiatrists, and people in the professional mental health world. So, and if you talk to somebody in the spectrum, an adult in the spectrum, and can tell you about that trauma, you're going to be surprised at how many little things accumulate and have a dysfunctional person if we can apply the work for that. So if we adapt the system to the student, then we're going to have a successful adult. So that's also a recommendation for as a parents, as a grandparents, to request for children. Is the teacher adapting to the system? Is the son, grandson been receiving all those type of services from this perspective? Like I said, many teachers, they are convinced that they are doing the right thing, and they are not. So hopefully we can create some flexible communication, sensory awareness, which is my biggest thing, and the processing time, and multiple ways of learning. Normally, one of the authors says we have 8 different levels of intelligence. So that means not everybody is intelligent in the same world. Like in some, I'm an artist. I love to paint, but I don't have the skills, and computer skills are very poor. So we have different levels of intelligence, and we have to identify that also on the kids in the spectrum, the people in the spectrum. So that results in many ways to learn. Where somebody in the past, they used to be, oh, you are auditive, you are tactile, or you are visual. That's part of the past too. That is no longer. We need to see that level. How do your brain process the information? And the more that we understand that, the more that we accomplish results in every way, as educators, as employers, for workers, and everything. Again, forcing eye contact. That's one of my biggest stops. So, like I said, the micro gestures that we are aware. That's how the people, when they are getting interrogated by the police, they look at the micro gestures on the face or in the fingers and the legs. So all these for a good investigator is training for. The people on the spectrum doesn't need that much of the training. They can see that. They can see patterns. So you're going to lie when you are doing this and that. This is a very common thing when you are lying. You go, oh, you touch one part of your face or the surrounding. So the people on the spectrum have that vision. They don't communicate it. Sometimes they don't even know they have it. And that's why they don't process the information. What is this button? So and sometimes when we say, oh, good job by not talking too loud. Good job by not doing this. Good job. That's rewarding suppression. So you are suppressing the people for not being natural, and you're rewarding that. So we have to be careful in that path. And misreading the behaviors. The behaviors, and that's what we see. But the real base of the behaviors is if you see an iceberg, you're going to see over the surface all the behaviors. What you see on there is going to be the 8 senses, and the very bottom of that iceberg, the autism iceberg, is the DNA changes. So the DNA, right now we have identified over 300 links of the DNA. If you don't know, we have 32 million connections of the DNA as a regular person, as a typical person. And some of those links, they are not connected. Or some of those are off or on an autistic person. And that's why the DNA is the base right now. As much as the research can tell us, that's the base of autism. Autism and all the most of the neurodiversities. So that's why sometimes we see the surface, which is the behavior. We need to go deeper, thinking about the iceberg, and you see a different part of a person, a new person. So we try to regulate the people, and we don't give a chance to for the expectation to regulate. We force that regulation when people need some time to regulate. It's the same what happened to my wife. My brother-in-law just died recently, and I give it a chance to regulate, and then she can function. When I give her the notice that my brother was dead, she started to cry, obviously, and then after that, then she started to book her ticket to go to Mexico. Given the times, that's an example of given time for regulation. That then for autistic people, they need that time of regulation. And some other educators force that. They want the response of the same speed as a neurotypical kid. That's forcing. So we need to connect. The way of connection is like I said, the polyvagal system, let them respond. And when we, even that part, is when we connect it to the person in the spectrum. Also, when we have people, co-workers, that they have the same issue, that let them think about it and you'll see the productivity. So we need to understand before we intervene, because if we intervene without understanding, we don't know if the intervention is the right one. So if we have to try to be aware of that intervention, it's going to be what really they need or what they want. So differentiate that part. And then we have to be flexible, because the flexibility is going to make us richer on the relation. And although the previous one, the expectation, the correction, the intervention, they are not possible without the flexibility. We need to understand the adaptation. The adaptation is not going to be only from the person in the spectrum. Also has to come from us. And then that's what we call a real inclusion. And some classrooms, they said, oh, I'm an inclusive teacher because I teach the same for every kid. Inclusion, the real inclusion, not only in education, also in our life, is when everybody is learning at the same level. When we teach in different levels to different people, not everything as like cookies. We are not cookie cutters. We have to individualize education, also or life with people in the spectrum. We have to be flexible because, like I said, I just mentioned a few of the neurodiversities. Well, there are about 17 neurodiversities classified right now. So, and then, like I said, the most common one is autism. So that together, then we have to create a structure and flexibility. The structure for people on the spectrum is one of the most famous things. That when we change something, they cannot be flexible for the changing. And that's one of the characteristics that the doctors and people in mental health determine to be a person in the spectrum, the rigidity. We need to break tasks. If we say, you need to pick up that table and put all the plates on the trash and then clean the toilet, that's too much. First, clean the table. Then take the covers. Then arrange the chairs. So that's how we break tasks. But you can generalize that for everything that a command given to a person and the spectrum, and you see how successful you're going to become. And some of these people, I don't know if you know Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin is one of the most famous people on the spectrum. She has several books. Her second book, I think, is Thinking in Pictures. She said all the autistic people first thinking in pictures. Recently, she corrected because she said they thinking in pictures also in patterns. Temple Grandin has been here at Framingham State University. Had the opportunity to see her there. But she corrected that. So visuals are very important for people. Sometimes even a gesture is a visual. People in the spectrum, they're having a hard time reading the body. But if you over exaggerate, if you say, I'm mad with a very mad face, oh, okay, now I get it. So we have to use visuals even if they are not available. Do you go to a school and you see people with icons hanging on their keys? Those are very common tools for us as educators for the kids on the spectrum. It's to given a command, stand up, doesn't function. When they see the picture, oh, they understand what it is. So, and then you need to allow movement because sometimes the person is regulated, the movement sends a different information to the brain, so they can come up with a different response. But if we don't let them, like run from here to there, we try to hold the hands, then also you are restraining the person and then don't let them be. Finally, people, they are not a struggle because they don't have the capacity of do things. People are struggling because the system is different. So we talk about the change in the system, and please understand the system so you can change it. If we don't understand the system that we create, we cannot change it. It's like your car. You open the hood and you see a lot of things that you don't understand. And when you understand how the engine works, is how you can fix it. The same thing with a system oriented for people on the spectrum. The thing is right now, and that's why the series of conference are asking to change the system. Are we really ready to change it? We can be ready, but we also can be in the process of being ready. And we have to continue with this conversation for a long time until probably your sons, your grandsons are in a happy world, which is the system is adapted for them, and we are happy in that part. So, and this is my final part of the presentation, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you have them.
I have a question. So where do genetics fall into it? Where you can have, a father and mother that seem to not be on the spectrum, autistic or anything, yet their child has autism. Is there any genetics to it?
Yes, but this autism is genetic-based neurodiversity. Henry McCrown in 2010, which is one of the most famous researchers on the spectrum, in the genetic part, he is the person who divided the human genome. But also, when he had all these database of the genome, then that's when he identified. At that moment, there was 17 links who create autism. Now we are some authors talking about 107, some others are at 300, close to 300. But autism is a genetic-based neurodiversity. The environment changes a little bit when also part of that study is when the mother during the pregnancy has an infection, not Tylenol, that's as a but an infection, stress, and that's part of that stress. I see it, Framingham has a very large Brazilian community. Some of the students that I have in the school is because the migration of the mother during the pregnancy. And that's we are finding all those results. So genetics are very important. So I think it's probably 95% of the cause of autism.
Thank you for clarifying an issue that's really very complex. I just want to make one comment. When you were talking about the immigrant parents who said, I can't ask for services, and you replied, your child was born in the country and how they'll feel service. I want to make sure that everybody in the audience also understands that it doesn't matter whether the child was born in the country or not. Years ago, the Supreme Court in the Texas case said schools can't ask whether kids are here legally or illegally. If they're here, they're entitled to attend the school in the district, and they're entitled to receive any services that the school district provides to ensure that they be successful.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. Yeah, the school system doesn't even ask for citizenship or things like that. We provide service for people who migrate. If they migrate today, tomorrow they can be in school. As long as they have the vaccine. That's one of the requirements for the educational system. But there's no other limitations. They don't have to prove they are born here. We just need proof of address. That's it. Because we cannot, this public system cannot provide services for a person who is native and French. They have to be local. But yes, thank you for that clarification. Any other comments or questions, please?
We have a child who's neurodiverse, and one of the things that we noted early on was what I used to call the tigers on to get you, the anxiousness, anxiety at every level, every activity. And in school, it became, again, very apparent that she had those anxiety issues and everything else. Even though she was diagnosed early, she didn't really get enough services early on, so she's a little farther behind in that. Is there something that's happening to early diagnose these types of things and get the earlier support and services?
Yeah, right now we are more educated providers, but also as services, they don't have the quality that we expect yet. We're working on that. That's what you see. That's the nature of this hamlet because services are to understand the whole spectrum. And if we just work on the services for behavioral services, that's not what's going to happen. We have a person in the audience who is related to ABA. ABA just stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. Applied Behavior Analysis is the most common tool for people on the spectrum. And Applied Behavior Analysis tries to change the behavior to fix the person. That was in the past. Right now, the Applied Behavior Analysis is changing to understand the person and help the person. But not everybody is doing that turn. So the quality of the services depends on how much we demand, how much we are educated to request the services. And I can tell you in the school system, we need an update on the services based on the senses, not on the behaviors, because you're going to just work over the tip of the ice. But the more that you educate yourself, the more that you can request. And you can ask for an evaluation on OT, occupational therapy. We have three types of therapy. So we have physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. So if I want to eat something, the physical therapy is going to tell me how to lift my hand. Then occupational therapy is going to tell me to open my mouth. And then the speech is going to tell me how to chew. That's how roughly we divide our services. But if we don't complement this sequence, then it doesn't work for me if I can put the food next to my mouth, if I don't know how to open it. So, and then if I can open it and I just hold it right here, I'm not chewing it. There's lack of the sequence of the complementation of the services. That's the more that you educate yourself, you are more capable to request more services. Because not all the schools, even we have 9 elementary schools in Framingham, and some of those we have classrooms with ASD called autistic spectrum disorder, and not all the schools are on the same level. I'm lucky that I'm a preschool and I can provide some of those services from the foundation, from the elementary, basic preschool level. And then we have a stronger students who go, and then they're gonna demand more services. Also, we as an educators try to universalize the services, and this is a very strong task. So hopefully, when you request services from the school of private services too, you need to see how the level of those services they provide, the quality, what is expected.
Thank you for having breakfast with us this morning. Just wonder if there's any pushback from groups, the word spectrum. I thought I heard neurotypical, and it's my opinion that everyone's spectrum to a certain degree. So just wondering if you're getting pushback from the educated, groups that you're working with.
Yes, some people have this comment like, "Oh, you are a little bit autistic. Oh, you are this." We're all neurodiverse. It's very hard to. When we say neurotypical, it's the most common used word to understand it, but that's not the reality. When you are autistic, you can't be little autistic or much autistic. It's like pregnancy, same thing. You cannot be a little pregnant. You're pregnant, you're autistic or not. So, but when we classify a person in the spectrum, typically they have 5 characteristics, but the 3 of them, they are lack of communication or poor communication, the stereotypes, the lack of visual contact, even we don't force it, but the lack of visual contact. Also, the socializing part. Those are the things that I can give you key to that. Now, the community wants to understand also that the neurodiverse community wants to make us understand that we have parts of it. But that doesn't mean we are neurodiverse. ADHD has only 3 levels. We need to fight for the 7 levels. And sometimes not everybody who's jumping around is ADHD. Or not all the ADHD have to be jumping around. They are sitting, they are passive. So we need to differentiate what the word neurodiverse understand, because it's almost a universe, and how are we fitting into it. But if we use negative labels, then that's when we're not going to understand neurodiversity. So we need to try to go to the basics. What is diverse and what is neurodiverse? And that's how you can understand better. I hope that this answers your question. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm a social worker and have worked in schools. I agree with all that you presented. I think it's humane. I am picturing, though, how teachers would respond to this kind of presentation. And I imagine professional development would be the avenue through which you try to help teachers understand this perspective. But I'm wondering if you have examples of how you've tried to help for classroom implementation of these principles. I think that's my question.
Yeah, I have presented information at different and several professional development days, and I start with the basics: what autism is and what is not. And the attendance for those are really not the lead teachers. The persons who attend my presentations for the last 3 years are other than lead teachers. Just 1 or 2 lead teachers have been at my presentations, and then they receive the information. The system is not ready for that change. That's what I mentioned. Change the system, and we can be rolling like a machine. But the medical system, to change it is really hard. To me, it's a personal opinion. One of the biggest markets in the United States is insurance. The insurance companies, they manage the medical results. So in order to a person in the spectrum to receive services, they have to be audited by the insurance first. And sometimes they don't receive the services necessary. So how can we change that when the lobbies are one of the strongest in the Congress and all the New York City supporting all that? ABA became a billionaire industry in the United States. 10 years ago, it was not as strong as it is right now. But you can go to Facebook or any media, you can find the schools like the ABA. The school trains people in ABA with the very basic, like a mechanical teaching, but they don't teach the nature of ABA. The ABA has evolved to the 4th generation right now. Now it's coming that I sometimes with my coworkers, even with a PCBA, which is board certified in behavioral analysis, you ask them, what generation are you working on the ABA? And they ask me like, well, Artemis just went to the moon, something like that. But totally uninformed. And that's what I said. If we educate ourselves, we can look for services and other stuff. Hopefully, when I retire, and I hope it's going to be near in the next 3 years, I can be an advocate for that, because right now we have a conflict of interest as an employee of the system. But as soon as I retire, I promise I'll wait fine. 5, really 5.
Thank you for joining us today. My question is this: it actually goes back to your comment about autism and the roots in genetics, and you already dismissed the Tylenol theory. However, there are people out there that have this strong feeling that childhood vaccinations could present themselves as a route to children developing autism. And so the question is to vaccinate or not vaccinate.
The vaccines fraud has been proved. Well, right now the short answer is vaccinate. Vaccines are not proved. They don't have a scientific proof that they produce autism. Because the vaccines, they come after you come out of your mom's. Autism starts before the moment of pregnancy. That's when autism starts. So the vaccines, by logic, chronologically, cannot produce autism. That's number one. What happened in the past in England, as doctors say, the triple medicine, the rubiola and the autism, that's what the cause of autism because of mercury. And he published in the Lancet, which is a very reputable publication, that the vaccines are that. After years, then he had to back up because they discovered the fraud in that. So a group of lawyers and doctors, they create that person to come with that statement. And then after years, the Lancet had to publish it, and I think he spent some time in jail because of that in England. So, but then that's a myth. I know a family in Framingham that received $2 million by pursuing the lab. And a lot of people became rich. And that's why they said, blame the vaccine. Then they're going to be rich because the sun and all the suffering, somebody has to pay for it. But there was many arrangements out of court about those payments. And then basically the people who took advantage of that money was using a statement that was not true. So there's not a scientific proof of that.
Yeah, but are there any medications that are useful?
All the medications that work on the symptoms, they're not cure for autism because it's not a disease. But sometimes if we are overexcited, over this, over that, under this, under that, that's what the medications, they can help us. Sometimes people use ADHD medication. But the ADHD medication, just an example, is it doesn't take it down. But the medication makes your neurotransmitters to be more active. So your inhibition system can be functional at the level that you have to perform activities in your everyday life. So that's one of the goals of the medication, to regulate the dysfunction of your part of the system that is not connected. So they produce more connections, or if you are over-connected, they reduce the connections. That's one of the purpose of the medication. So all the medications that are on the spectrum right now, they are not the same. Like you can start with 10 milligrams, then the next day you can see overreaction, so that the doctors regulate. They need a period of time to have the correct dose, and that changes over time because the brain has a new neural connections that make that medicine be more common into the brain, and then the nature of the brain of autistic persons comes again. So it's like people with using substances, alcohol. At some point, your brain needs more and more and more. Sometimes your brain normalizes. What is it, the chemical in your brain? And that's why we need to change the milligrams of the doses. You have to fluctuate with that. And then by having a close contact with the doctor who prescribed that, that's when you become successful. And then the answer is yes. There are some medications that are good for that, but only for the symptoms. There is no medication for that.
Okay, thank you very much again, Mauricio.